Good morning. This is the Reverend Sarah Keane, the Assistant Curate in the Golden Cap team. Now, I'm sure when people say, I'd like to tell you all about the holiday I've just been on, you silently groan inside and think, oh dear, how long is this going to take? But my recent holiday in northern Spain was rather special in nature because it took the form of a pilgrimage. Many of you will possibly vaguely have heard of the Camino de Santiago, and for many young people it's a kind of rite of passage where you walk across the plains of northern Spain over several weeks to reach Santiago. Fortunately, for those of us who are slightly more mature and have less time to take a vacation, there are a number of other routes, of which the Camino Inglés is one. You don't need to know much Spanish to know that that translates as the English Camino. And the reason it was called that was that it starts in Ferrol on the northern Spanish coast. And what medieval pilgrims did was that they sailed from the UK to Spain and then walked along the Camino Inglés to Santiago for the last part of the journey. The Camino Inglés consists of 112 kilometres, which is just over the 100 kilometres you need in order to qualify for your certificate as a pilgrim at the end of it. I did it with a group of 4 friends, and most of us, although relatively fit, probably only 1 or 2 were really keen walkers. So, given our collective ages, it was decided that we'd use this rather good system where the Spanish post office takes all your main baggage in between the small hotels where you're staying, and you simply need to walk with a day pack. So yes, it is a bit softer than the main Camino, but still, most days we walked somewhere between 15 and 30 kilometres, so we still had to keep up a pretty brisk pace, and there was in the middle part of it quite a lot of hill walking to do, so it had its demands nonetheless. For the others, it was probably a question of time out with friends, a holiday, but also, interestingly enough, when we got to Santiago, although I was the only one who said I was doing it for religious reasons, most of the others said that they were doing it for spiritual reasons, which I found quite interesting. And we had some really good talks along the way about people's inner spirituality and what Christ means to me and why it's important to be a Christian and a Christian minister in particular. And certainly along the way, we stopped off at a lot of churches, and they were as interested to do that as I was. The Camino has certain symbols that are very important, which are modern versions of the ones used by medieval pilgrims. The possibly best known symbol of the Camino is the scallop shell with the cross of Santiago, St. James, on it. And so most of us picked up one of these along the way to hang off our backpacks. But it's very important, if you want your certificate at the end of all of this, to be able to prove that you have actually walked all the way rather than some sort of cheating. And so each pilgrim takes with them a kind of passport, their credencial, which is tremendously important because you need to have that stamped twice a day to prove that you walked all the way. And so every time any of us stopped at a cafe alongside other pilgrims, there was a mad scramble to get all the stamps you need. And in fact, the cafes are very canny about this and are very keen to prove on their advertising outside that they have the important stamp, so that people will stop and have a cup of coffee at their cafe rather than at someone else's. And there was a lot of camaraderie with other groups along the way. even though the Camino Inglés isn't as crowded as the main Camino, certainly we got to know and by encounter various other groups that we met along the way. There was a group of rather stylish looking Argentinians who, although they had all the correct kit, just somehow had a certain sense of style about their kit. And in fact, the men in the party were clearly not finding it too difficult to walk, because by the end of the day they were often smoking cigars as they came into the final stop. Alternatively, there were others who possibly hadn't read all the information about the kit you needed, and a lovely Danish woman who'd felt it would be absolutely fine to wear a sundress and sandals along the way, and whose feet unfortunately rather suffered as a result of not realising she needed proper boots. In fact, kit is very important, and I couldn't have done it without the boots I'd spent quite a bit of money on, and was very relieved, and it was a very good investment. But what it gives you is a lovely time to look at the countryside and just spend some quiet time when you're not chattering with your friends. It is a very spiritual experience for everyone, not just those who have, like us, who are sort of very focused on the religious aspects. Once you get into Santiago, one of the first stops is to go to the pilgrim office and get your certificate when you've proved you've got all your stamps. This is my one. It's all in Latin. You'll notice, eagle-eyed ones will notice it's actually in my maiden name, because my passport's still in my maiden name, because they do quite a lot of checks. In fact, it was quite funny that the lady who was the leader of our little party went in, and you now fill it on online, all your information, and show your stamps. And they ask what people do for a living. They're sort of interested. And if you've ticked one of your team is there for religious reasons, you're given two options, this being a Catholic country. And since I clearly wasn't a male priest, my friend Jackie was forced to put down that I was a nun, as that was the nearest she could get to a Church of England curate. So that's probably the nearest I'll ever get to being quite that saintly. But the real highlight at the end of this is to go to the pilgrim mass at the huge cathedral in Santiago. Regardless of your religious leanings as far as denomination is concerned, it is a wonderful spiritual experience. All those people gathered from around Europe and beyond who've come into the cathedral, and it's hard not to be hit broadside by the Holy Spirit as the Mass goes on, and we're welcomed and just worship together as people who have come all this way. It may no longer be particularly to see the remains of St. James. It's more just a huge group of Christians coming together in a holy place. An absolutely wonderful experience.